For 35 years, the B-2 was the ultimate ghost, a radar cross-section smaller than a pigeon, invisible to missile guidance radars. But the world beneath it changed. Russia's S-500, China's network sensor grids, now see the shape of a ghost. The bomber was built to vanish against fire control systems, not a web that detects its absence. The margin is shrinking, and it might already be gone. The B-2 Spirit, a flying wing shaped like a minimalist shadow designed in the 1980s to penetrate the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, deliver 40,000 pounds of ordnance, and vanish. But tonight, its singular advantage is being tested by physics that did not exist when it was designed. The question that now haunts every war planning room is simple: can it still do what it was built for? To understand why that question is now an emergency, you have to go back to the exact physics the B-2 was designed to exploit. The aircraft's radar cross-section is smaller than a large bird, roughly 0.1 meters squared. That isn't magic, it is shape. The flying wing deflects radar waves away from the transmitter, while its skin absorbs the remainder into heat. For 30 years, this equation held. Soviet and then Russian fire control radars, the ones that actually guide missiles, operated in high-frequency bands that the B-2 was meticulously shaped to defeat. The bomber flew through their beams like a razor through fog. But here's the problem. The B-2's designers optimized it against the radars that existed in the 1980s. They did not build it for a world of low-frequency VHF arrays that exploit a different kind of physics. At longer wavelengths, the flying wing no longer looks like a smooth shape. It begins to resonate. The edges of its silhouette become detectable, not precisely enough to guide a missile, but enough to whisper, something is here. And over the last decade, that whisper has become a scream. Russia has deployed the S-400 and the new S-500 Prometheus, systems that fuse low-band surveillance radars with networked fire control tracks across entire regions. China has blanketed the Taiwan Strait with over-the-horizon radars that can spot aircraft 3,000 kilometers away, and has fielded the Ji-27V, a meter wave system built with one specific mission: finding invisible bombers before they reach their launch points. They call it the Stealth Killer Radar. For the B-2, the nightmare scenario is no longer a single missile lock. It is a networked fuse. If a low-frequency array detects a ghost in the grid, it doesn't need to guide a missile itself. It just needs to hand off a target cue to a high-frequency engagement radar fast enough to catch the bomber before it slips away. And that handoff, once impossible, is now being automated. But the B-2 wasn't defenseless. It carries a defensive management system that classifies enemy emitters in real time, allowing pilots to route around threats. That system has been upgraded repeatedly, but it can only avoid radars it knows exist. And the Chinese network has been building something pilots have never seen before: a cognitive sensor web that learns from every flight, every maneuver, every gap in the ghost shape. The margin that the B-2 once relied upon was measured in minutes. Now, it may be measured in seconds. And that margin was finally tested in a way the public never heard about, on a night when a B-2 flew a mission profile over the South China Sea and something tracked it the entire way. Imagine that night. A B-2 Spirit, callsign Ghost 21, departs Diego Garcia. Profile, a long loop patrol over the South China Sea. No weapons release, just presence. Standard mission, flown dozens of times. But something new was listening. China's over-the-horizon radar net, the Type 726 arrays, had been upgraded with machine learning algorithms that sift through ocean scatter. For months, they'd been training those filters on B-2 flight signatures, and on this night, for the first time, they held the contact. Not a fleeting flicker, but a persistent track. The bomber's defensive management system lit up with emitter warnings. Pilots altered course. The track didn't fade. Because the network had just performed the impossible, a low-frequency VHF anti-stealth radar, the Ji-27V, had cued a high-frequency fire control radar fast enough to threaten a firing solution. The B-2 slipped away by seconds. The lesson was final. The ghost had been seen, and the systems that saw it were learning faster than the bomber could adapt. This was not a fluke. It was the culmination of a 20-year race. The B-2 was optimized against the radars of its era: S-band, X-band, fire control emitters that demand a direct lock. Its flying wing shape scatters those wavelengths harmlessly. But low-frequency radars, operating in the meter wave band, exploit a different physics. At these wavelengths, the aircraft's edges resonate. The whole shape lights up like a bell struck at its natural frequency. Detection ranges stretch to hundreds of miles. The catch: low-frequency radars are too imprecise to guide a missile. They can tell something is out there, but not exactly where. For years, that was the comfort. Detection without a firing solution is just an inconvenience. But China and Russia spent a decade removing the catch. They built sensor grids that fuse data in real time. Imagine a net of dozens of emitters, each with a different frequency, all feeding into a central AI. The meter wave radar provides the early track. A passive ARF sensor triangulates the B-2's faint emissions. An over-the-horizon skywave radar monitors a 1,000-mile arc, and when the AI assembles these fragments, it no longer needs a singular radar to lock on. It only needs the collective blur to be precise enough to cue a high-frequency engagement radar at the critical moment. This is called network-centric sensor fusion, and it is now deployed. Russia's S-500 Prometheus is built around exactly this architecture: an acquisition radar that sees 600 kilometers, a command post that fuses feeds from dispersed trackers, and missiles that loft high then drop from above, where the B-2 stealth profile is weakest. In the Taiwan Strait, the Chinese HQ-9B batteries are woven into a mesh that includes the JI-27V, skywave radars, and even space-based infrared sensors. Detect, cue, shoot. The kill chain that once took minutes now closes in seconds. But the B-2 is not helpless. Its defensive management system, upgraded continuously, identifies emitter types and plots safe corridors. Pilots trained to route around threat rings using terrain masking and electronic warfare. However, the DMs relies on a library of known signals. Against a cognitive network that adapts in real time, switching frequencies, shifting patterns, the library becomes obsolete mid-flight, and the adversary has another advantage: time. Every flight the B-2 makes near their borders feeds the learning algorithm. The bomber's signature becomes less shadow, more silhouette. The margin that once allowed a B-2 crew to slip past undetected is no longer measured in miles, but in seconds. In a conflict against a peer adversary, those seconds evaporate before the bomb bays even open. That shrinking margin set off a quiet panic inside the Pentagon. Classified Wargames in 2023 concluded that legacy stealth platforms without deep upgrades would suffer unacceptable attrition by the early 2030s. The B-2's airframe, for all its upgrades, new radar absorbent coatings, improved DMs, even the B-2C modernization, could not outrun the physics of sensor networking. If the B-2 could no longer penetrate, then a cornerstone of America's long-range strike triad would be broken. The answer, already being built in secret, had to solve not just the radar problem, but the entire electromagnetic spectrum: infrared, visual, acoustic, even data link emanations. It had to be a multi-spectral ghost that could operate inside a networked family of autonomous decoys and jammers. That answer is not the B-2. That answer is the B-21 Raider. And the Raider's rushed development is a confession. The age of the spirit is ending, and the next bomber must erase the mistakes that left the ghost visible. The B-21 Raider is the response, but its rushed timeline reveals a deeper panic. The Air Force is spending $6.1 billion next year alone to accelerate the Raider, and the first operational squadron won't arrive until the late 2020s. Gap years. Years in which the B-2 must still fly. And in those years, the sensor mesh that nearly caught Ghost 2-1 will not stay still. It will expand, fueled by artificial intelligence that digests every piece of electromagnetic data, learning to distinguish a B-2's unique resonance, not in months, but in days. The nightmare is no longer detection, it's identification. A low-frequency radar pings a return. A neural network matches that return to a B-2's spectral fingerprint, and the network assigns a kill chain before the bomber's pilot even knows the emitter is online. But here's the part no one talks about. The B-2's vulnerability isn't just about the radar spectrum anymore. It's about the infrared one. The B-2's engine exhaust was cleverly shielded on top of the wing, deflecting heat upward, away from ground-based infrared sensors. That was brilliant in 1989. Today, space-based infrared constellations like China's Yaogan satellites look down. They see the heat that rises, yes, but also the friction-warmed leading edges, the sun glinting off a cold-soaked wing. A multispectral sensor can lock onto a B-2 by its thermal silhouette alone. The Ghost is warm, and from above it glows. The S-500 Prometheus was designed with exactly this kill chain in mind. Its acquisition radar sees out to 600 kilometers, but its engagement battery can receive cues not just from radar, but from space-based infrared. A B-2 cruising at altitude presents a thermal picture that modern satellite constellations can track with frightening fidelity. Pair that with a low-frequency radar that confirms the target isn't a decoy, and the fire control radar only needs to illuminate for a split second. That's how the S-500 hunts. It stabs. It doesn't sweep. And China's solution is even more insidious. The HQ-9B network in the Taiwan Strait uses a concept called multi-static detection. Imagine multiple radars in different locations, all staring at the same patch of sky. One transmitter, several receivers. The B-2 shape deflects radar waves, but those deflected waves have to go somewhere. Multiple receivers triangulate the deflection pattern. They see the ghost not by direct reflection, but by its absence, the black shape moving through a field of radio noise. It's not precise enough to guide a missile, but it's good enough to hand off to an X-band engagement radar that will light up only at the last moment, when the bomber is already inside the lethal range. Worse, the B-2 fleet is not what it was. Only 20 airframes remain, each with over 30 years of structural fatigue. Maintenance hours per flight hour have climbed to staggering levels. Stealth coatings require reapplication between missions. The defensive management system can be upgraded, but the airframe itself is a fixed geometry. It cannot morph to outsmart new frequencies. It is forever the shape it was in 1989. Every adversary radar designer knows that shape. Every wargame shows that if one B-2 is lost, the psychological and strategic blow outweighs the aircraft itself, because it would prove the ghost can be killed. That proof is what the Pentagon fears most. Deterrence rests on the belief that the bomber can penetrate. If that belief shatters, so does the credibility of America's long-range strike guarantee. So the question ceases to be whether the B-2 can survive a single mission. It becomes whether the mere perception of its vulnerability is already changing the balance of power. And in the South China Sea, that perception is being tested daily. The cognitive sensor web doesn't need to shoot down a B-2 to win. It only needs to make the adversary believe it will, and that belief, once seated, forces the bomber into standoff ranges, renders its penetrating role obsolete, and opens the door for a new kind of air defense that doesn't fire a single missile. The B-21 will eventually arrive, with multispectral stealth, network-centric drone wingmen, and a design built to break this paradigm. But until it does, the B-2 must fly into the teeth of a threat environment it was never designed to see. And the question that now hangs over every mission briefing is not whether the B-2 can still sneak past the radars. It's whether the margin that remains is enough to keep its crew alive long enough to release their weapons. Because in the war that's already happening in the electromagnetic spectrum, the ghost is no longer invisible. It's just running out of time. That running out of time is not a metaphor. It's a countdown measured in mission hours. The B-2 still flies, but its mission profile has already changed. No longer can it penetrate deep into contested airspace alone and confident. Now, every sortie begins with a new calculus. How many drones, jammers, and decoys can be layered around it to obscure the ghost? The Air Force has quietly integrated the B-2 with the Mauled X, an autonomous miniature decoy that mimics a bomber's radar signature and electronic emissions. A single B-2 can now spawn a phantom squadron, saturating the cognitive sensor web with false returns. It's a trick, but a necessary one. A digital camouflage that buys the real bomber seconds. Electronic warfare has become the B-2's new stealth. The defensive management system, once a passive library, is now being upgraded with active jamming algorithms that spoof low-frequency radars. It listens for the VH pulse, analyzes the waveform, and retransmits a distorted echo that makes the bomber appear dozens of miles away from its actual position. It's a cat and mouse game of distortion, but it works sometimes. The problem is that spoofing degrades when the enemy network uses frequency hopping and multiple receivers. The B-2 can blind one radar. It cannot blind an entire mesh. So the mission planners now route the bomber not through empty air, but through corridors of electronic chaos, gaps where friendly jammers, cyber attacks, and even high-altitude balloons with reflectors create a temporary sanctuary. The Ghost no longer needs to hide from radars, it hides inside the noise. But the cost of this adaptation is range. Every decoy and jammer requires a support aircraft, or a reduced weapon load. The B-2's combat radius effectively shrinks when forced to rely on escorting electronic attack planes, or when carrying standoff missiles instead of penetrating bombs. The promise of the B-2 was to deliver precision strikes deep inside enemy territory without any escort. That promise has now been broken. It can still strike, but not with impunity, and not without a constellation of support. The question then is not whether the B-2 can still perform, but whether it can still perform its original mission to hold at risk the most heavily defended targets from the opening hours of a conflict. The Air Force's answer, revealed in a classified assessment leaked last year, is a reluctant no. The B-2 is now officially a transitional platform, relegated to lower threat sectors while the B-21 prepares for the high-end fight. And here is the final surprising detail. In a mock raid conducted above Alaska in 2024, a B-2 paired with 2 prototype B-21 airframes and 6 autonomous drones quietly flew a simulated strike against a replica of a Russian S-500 site. The B-2 itself never entered the engagement zone. It orbited 200 miles away, acting as a mothership, feeding targeting data to the drones that swarmed the radars. The drones spoofed, jammed, and overwhelmed the defenses, and then the B-21 slipped through and dropped simulated weapons. The Ghost of the past had become merely a node in a network team. Its penetration days already ceded to its successor. That night, the B-2 didn't sneak past the radars. It watched from safety as the future did. And that future has a name that signals the shift from survival to dominance. A shift that redefines the very meaning of stealth. That name is Raider, and it represents more than a replacement. It's an admission that invisibility was never a permanent condition, only a temporary advantage. The B-2 taught the world how to hide from radar. The world learned how to listen for the shape of a ghost. Now, the Raider must hide from the entire electromagnetic spectrum, from infrared to acoustic, and it must do so while commanding swarms of autonomous wingmen that fight alongside it. The arms race between stealth and sensor never ended, it just shifted into a new frequency. The question is no longer whether a single bomber can survive, it's whether the very concept of a penetrating, manned platform will remain viable against an adversary that learns, adapts, and networks its defenses across a continent. For now, the B-2 still flies, but its legacy is already written in the design of its successor. If you want to understand the future of warfare, don't watch the missiles, watch the sensors. Because the next war will be won not by the weapon that fires first, but by the network that sees first. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the full story on the B-21 Raider and the new era of air power.